because part of what this training is hosted by 350 Seattle's Pledge of Resistance team. And 350 Seattle is an organization that works toward climate justice and really focuses on big system change and using direct action and civil disobedience as one of the methods of the many that they use to make that happen. And so the Pledge of Resistance team wants to have a series of trainings over and over. So I think that's about that. And with that, Alice is going to get us a little centered and ready for the evening.
Okay. So this is a digital training, but we do want to acknowledge the land that some of us are on right now. I'm in West Seattle right now, which is the traditional land of the Duwamish and the Coast Salish peoples. And we also want to give the opportunity for people to know more about Real Rent Duwamish. We're going to include that in the follow-up email, and this is a way to provide some level of transfer of resources to the Duwamish tribe, which do not have federal recognition at this time. So we wanted to mention that. So right now, if everyone can kind of take their hands and their feet, if it makes sense for you right now to close your eyes, I welcome you to do that. You're going to put your hands on your knees and your feet on the ground, if that makes sense at this time. We are all coming from really different places in our days in a really weird time. And so my goal is to bring us a little bit together into the same space as we start talking about being at actions and protests and rallies. So close your eyes, feel the ground, think about what has happened a little bit today, where you're coming from, what caused you to decide to register for this, and then also how you ended up deciding to join. I know that sometimes that is a weird decision when it comes to Zoom meetings. So take a breath in through your nose and out through your mouth. And as you think about where you're coming from, let something go. And we're just going to take a couple breaths all together, and we will continue from there. So I'll welcome you back in another 30, 45 seconds. All right. Okay. So, Kara and I've been planning this over the last couple days and weeks. The reason that we are hosting this training right now is because we're in a moment of mass uprising. We want to recognize that there's a lot going on. Right now, we're particularly focused on the Black Lives Matter movement and resistance to state violence and resistance to systemic oppression. We are also in the context of a global pandemic and of climate crisis. So that's a lot to hold. Our hope is that this training will support you moving forward in attending places of protest, places of action against systems that we oppose. But we also hope that this training can support you in caring for yourself and caring for others in your day-to-day life. So with that in mind, we want to do a little bit of an introduction. And so we're just going to use the chat box since there are so many of us. And we have 3 questions in mind. So the first question, and so I'll say the questions, I'll let you know what my answers are, and then we'll take about 5 minutes to either think it over or to type yours in and read what everyone else says. So first of all, my name is Alice. I use she and her pronouns. That's the first question. The second question, what skill do you bring to movement? And for me, I would say one of my skills is that I love talking to people and building relationships. The third question, what do you want to grow and develop? And I want to get better at questioning my assumptions, especially by using writing. So we're gonna just kind of let the chat box be a free-for-all over the next couple minutes. The first question is name and pronouns. Second question, what skills do you bring to movement? And then what do you want to grow and develop? So take some time to think that over, and we will potentially read some of those things out loud, or just kind of All right, thank you all for sharing. I am excited to have an opportunity to read through this a little bit more, and I'm really excited that you're all here. So I'm gonna pass this off to Kara, and we'll just be kind of switching back and forth throughout this evening.
Yeah, thanks everybody. That was really fun to get to kind of have a little glimpse of who all is here. One of my favorite things about training is getting a chance to kind of meet people a bit before and after. Since we're in this pandemic time and that can't happen, it's still cool to have a little bit of a way to know a little bit about you. So thank you. So during this training, we may use some words or vocabulary or acronyms or something that you may not have heard of. And if that happens, please feel free to ask a question. We're going to try really hard to not make that happen, but a lot of times activism can feel kind of like a hard thing to get into because there's this whole other language, and it may seem like people are speaking in a way about something that you don't know. So if you do hear something that we say, please ask if you're not aware what it is. And I'm gonna just mention a few things that we might say just off the bat in case to clear up those. We are gonna be talking about a lot about consent. One of the main things as street medics when we treat people, our very first principle is do no harm. And the second main ethic of street medics that is very key to our specific training is consent-based care. So you probably have heard of consent before, but in this context, we are definitely talking about it as a continuous and ongoing process. Just because someone has let you put your hand on their shoulder to lead them away from the pepper spray or tear gas doesn't mean that they've consented for you to actually spray their eyes if that's what the next step is in the process. So make sure it's something that you do continually ask about and consider consent to mean something that is continual and ongoing. We're going to talk a bit about scope of practice or scope of care. That might come up sometimes, and that is just making sure that you always work within what you are trained to do. So if you don't have any medical training at all and someone is really badly injured, it's not a good idea to walk up to them and try to help them if it's beyond your scope of care, because it's possible that you could do more harm than good. So think about your scope of care and things that you have learned when you're kind of showing up in a lot of these situations. We may also mention the word affinity group. So this is a word, actually the concept of affinity groups was started in the Spanish Revolution. And it's small groups that show up at actions together, and you have an affinity for one another. You know each other, at least in some way. You've already agreed upon some things. So if we mention any affinity group types of things, that's what we're talking about, is a group of people who knows each other and has some connection to each other and has decided to do a thing together. And throughout this training, what we're talking about in the title, it's keeping yourself healthy and safe at protests. There are kind of some different types of protests that get tossed about words. There are most commonly, the way that I like to break it down in a direct action training that I do, is there are marches, rallies, demonstrations, civil disobedience, and direct actions. So those are all very different. A march is, well, we'll start with a rally because it doesn't go anywhere. A rally is when you all show up, you stand together, you're rallying for something. There may be speakers, people may be holding signs, you're rallied together. Now that can turn into a march, which is when you start moving. Some of the safety things that you think of for each of these scenarios is going to be different. If you're at a rally, the types of safety concerns you have are going to be very different than if you're actually on a march that's moving. So if someone calls for an event that's happening out in the streets, it's good to know at least some of the intention around what type of event it will be. Demonstration is a little more flexible. People use that a lot. I would say that what's been happening a lot has been kind of more like demonstrations that can be very fluid, and they may start stationary and move and then become stationary again. Something like noise demos, which every year here in Seattle, there's a noise demo outside the youth jail that's been going on as long as I've lived in Seattle. I moved here in 2012, so it's been going on longer than that. So a demonstration is like some kind of showing of something. And then civil disobedience and direct action are a little more specific and planned in a lot of cases. Civil disobedience would be when you knowingly break a law in order to make a point or to force a narrative. So that is something where something like a sit-in sort of deal where you go into a senator's office and say, we demand you pass this bill, and they say, I'm not going to do that, and people decide, okay, well then we're not leaving. We're going to break this law of trespassing in this private building. And then direct action is when you directly affect something, the direct action of stopping and making your point. So examples of that are like blockading fossil fuel infrastructure or blockading train shipments and things like that. And so if people say, hey, do you want to come to this rally? Then you can think about some of the things that would be applicable to a rally versus if somebody says, hey, do you want to go block an oil train? That's going to be a very different set of safety concerns. So it's always good to kind of ask when you're thinking about what type of thing you're going into in the streets, what a general plan of action is going to be. Yeah. So with that, we're just gonna get right into starting with the preparation side of things. And what we're gonna talk about first is some stuff to bring. And I am going to share my screen to show you this information. So the first and most important thing that you want to bring to any action is a buddy. Let me get that away. So street medics use something called Pearly in order to choose a buddy sometimes. And this is just some really important things to think about. So when you're going out to something, if you go alone and something happens to you, there's not going to be anyone there to help you, to get your information if you've been arrested, anything like that. If you're injured, there won't be someone who can tell your friends or someone else. So you want to try to have a buddy, and you want to think about a buddy that works best for you. Sometimes that might be your best friend, and you know, this is a person I know I can do anything with, and we can be here at this action, and it's going to be great. But sometimes you and your best friend might have very different ideas of what it means to be in the streets. So this is something that can kind of help you decide who you might want to take with you so that you're both kind of on the same page. Because being out in the streets can be a very chaotic situation, and it can turn into something very quickly. You know, I've been to many things in the past where it seems like the police are going to kind of just stand back and watch, and then all of a sudden they're surrounding people and hitting them with their bicycles to try to get them to move back. They've been using pepper spray for a long time, and they've been violent for a long time here in Seattle specifically, and in a lot of places, to protests. And so you always want to make sure that you're with somebody who can kind of move through that chaos with you. So PERLY is a good acronym to think of with that. And we're going to go through these letter by letter. First is physical vulnerabilities. So this is you'd want to check in with the person and see, what are maybe some physical realities. Like here in Seattle, we have a lot of hills, and I have a bad knee personally. So if we're going to be walking up and down, marching through the streets for hours and hours and hours, I might need to sit down and rest after a couple hills if my knee is acting up. So I would want to share that with my buddy, so that if my buddy is somebody who is just like peak physical shape athlete and wants to run up and down hills nonstop and always be at the front of everything, maybe we wouldn't be a good match for this specific situation, because I would want to rest more. Or that person could say, okay, I'd be willing to rest with you. So you want to talk about these physical vulnerabilities. So it includes any disabilities or injuries you may have. And it also includes things like if your physical appearance may be something that would get you targeted by police. You want to talk about that with your buddy so that you understand if one person has something about them that would make them be targeted and the other person does not. You want to agree upon what types of safety you want to do, like what your safety protocol will be for that. So if you're going out with somebody who's undocumented and they say, I really don't want to get anywhere near the front lines. If we are anywhere near police, I'd be afraid of getting snatched. Then you want to make sure that you're constantly looking around and protecting your buddy. So that's part of the physical vulnerabilities. You want to make sure to discuss all of that. The E is for emotional vulnerabilities. This is some stuff like if you are easily stressed out and what stress looks like for you. If people have certain trauma triggers or are upset by seeing police, then they may get very emotional around police. And then you'd want to make sure that you knew that and could work with them on ways to kind of calm them down and step back from the situation. And also if they had a bad day, say you plan to go out with a friend and then they have a really bad day at work, or somebody, something bad happens to them. And then they say, I'm just really not feeling it today. I'm really upset. You want to talk about that before you go out so that nobody feels like they have to be out in the street with kind of an emotional vulnerability up and at the front. So those triggers are really important. And with that, also how you can help. So it can be really nice to talk to your friend and say, what are some emotional triggers for you? And if that happens, how would you like me to respond? So then A is for arrestability. This is really important, and you always want to defer to the least arrestable buddy's needs. Some people have various reasons that they absolutely cannot be arrested. Nobody really wants to be arrested, except maybe people committing civil disobedience who know that that's what their goal is in the action. But you definitely want to make sure that you discuss any special legal concerns, like citizenship status, age if you're under 18, if you have any outstanding warrants or you're already on probation. Some of that information is really important to discuss when you're talking about arrestability. And also thinking about arrestability in terms of how long are you going to be in jail. In the state of Washington, they cannot hold you longer than 72 hours for a misdemeanor, but it's 90 days for a felony. And if there's one thing to always remember, it's that the police can lie to you and they can lie about you. and they can arrest you for something that you absolutely did not do and then hold you in jail. And so if you have to be at work, even if it's Zoom work in the time of a pandemic, if you have to be at work on Monday for a big presentation and it's Saturday night, you probably don't want to get arrested because it's likely you'd be in jail until Monday because they don't have hearings on Sunday. And you never know what they could do. So talking about arrestability is a very key part of choosing who you're going to be with and what your plan is going to look like. The R is for roles. So this is talking about your comfort with the action in general and if you have any role in it. So for example, Alice and I are street medics. If we go out to an action as a street medic, then that is a role that we are doing, and how we present ourselves in the moment is going to be based on that role. If you're going out as a photographer, or if you're going and you're like, I want to stand up at the front lines the whole time, that's my role, then you want to discuss that with your buddy, because what if your buddy wants their role to be staying really far back and observing? You need to make sure that you're kind of on the same page with that. And this is a good time too to talk about your experience in these types of situations. And that can be really helpful especially if you're new to going out in the streets. It may be helpful to buddy with somebody who has been out in the streets before and can kind of help you through some of the things and see what's going on. And you can also talk about what parts of being out there are your favorite and what's hard for you. Some people like standing around for hours, just standing there chanting. Some people are like, no, I gotta go. I want to walk. If we're not marching, if we've been at a rally for 30 minutes and nobody starts marching, I want to leave. I can't just stand there. So you want to know that in advance. And then also talking about what special skills you might have. So if you do have like CPR training or some kind of other skill that you can bring, making sure your buddy is aware of that, and then deciding when you may want to show up and start using that skill. The L is for loose ends. And this is just the final, just what other things do we need to talk about? Like, do you have to coordinate childcare, or does your childcare end at 6 p.m.? So you have to leave at 5:30, no matter what ends up happening. If it turns into a really cool thing you want to stay for, you still have to leave at 5:30. That's an important loose end to share. And you can talk about all kinds of things. This is also a good time to make a team name, especially if you're in an affinity group and you have different teams. Street medics in particular love team names, I think. And so this is a good time to do something like that, do something fun. Just chat about some things. Like, you maybe want to talk about what's your favorite food. Maybe after the action, we can go and get some takeout from that place and eat it at a safe distance on the sidewalk, or whatever you want to do. So that's the Pearl part of it. And that is the original part of what is now Pearly. The Y is a really important addition, and this stands for yes or no. So with this, after you've had this whole discussion about people's physical vulnerabilities, emotional vulnerabilities, how arrestable are you, what roles do you want to play or might you play, what loose ends are there, then you and your buddy should really have a good moment to say, is this going to work for us? This is where consent comes in and is really important. You have the right after that whole conversation to say, you know what? I don't think that actually we're well matched for this scenario. And that's fine. You should be able to say that. So it just kind of helps to have these things in mind and to have these discussions, because actions can be so stressful that it is really important for you to make sure that you're out there with somebody so you feel safe and protected and really, really supported in that moment. So I'm going to stop sharing at this time.
If you want to head to the next slide,
Cool.
you sharing, we'll go from there.
Awesome. I will do that. I'll go back to that.
Okay, so we're going to check in briefly about being at actions in the time of COVID-19. These are all things, I know we're super familiar with this. So hand sanitizer, as street medics, that's been like one of the roles that we've played is hand sanitizer distributors. We are kind of fortunate that we get to wear masks now. It does help with some of the like not being able to be as identified by the police. Obviously wear a mask, stay home if you feel sick. We are going to include these specific flyers. There'll be a link to them as part of what we send out. So we also want to recognize that for a lot of people, it does not make sense to choose to go out and protest at this time. So other ways that you can be of support, we're going to talk about being an emotional supporter or being available for check-ins and for some processing afterwards, providing food for folks who are protesting. I'm sure everyone has seen like many different donation options, being like a ride for people. It's always helpful. Well, we'll talk about which supplies to bring in a moment. I won't get ahead of myself. Being an emergency contact, I always have someone who knows that I'm out in the streets and then I check in with before I go to sleep. And they have agreed to be awake until that happens. And then, of course, picking up people's caregiving responsibilities, childcare, elder care, any of that is really beneficial. Fortunately, in Seattle, we have access to testing through the city of Seattle at the emission sites. I know that not everyone is in Seattle. And so definitely take advantage of those testing options. But we have also, like, for folks who are saying that they were at protests, the rate has been less than 1% coming back positive who have gotten tests. And so that's really good news as we're in the midst of a mass social uprising, especially with the consideration that COVID-19 has a much more profound effect on communities of color, on Black communities, on Indigenous communities. Let's see. So trying to maintain some space, of course, that is possible in some marches and in some rallies, definitely. Kara and I have taken to staying a little bit more on edges as part of our risk assessment. But sometimes that's not possible. And as we know, when it is not always possible to do that. So think about your risk, think about who you live with, think about your bubbles. I don't think that that's anything new, but it's part of the preparing to be out in the streets, to be protesting. Okay, can you switch to the next one? And we're going to talk about what to bring, or what to wear, what to bring. So right now we're still in the you haven't left your home yet phase. So making sure that you have plenty of water, making sure that you have your buddy, making sure that you have layers of clothing. Ideally, your clothing is not going to be like super identifiable. Oftentimes, I end up staying out later than I think I was going to. So I suggest hat and gloves as a way to not bring too much stuff, but that is going to be increase my warmth at night, pretty much. So bring layers. We know that weather changes. Warm hat, sun hat. Think about how you want to do that. Sunscreen. We suggest oil-free with chemical irritants or chemical weapons. The oil-free is going to be a water-based sunscreen is what we're advocating for. So oftentimes those are face sunscreens. Clearly bring a bandana or a mask. This is made not just this last week. Goggles are an option if you have it within your risk analysis that you are willing to be out for violence from the police or the state. Some Something I definitely want to emphasize is bringing medications, specifically EpiPen and albuterol. If you are someone that uses rescue medications, have those on you and tell your buddy about them. Maybe you should have Benadryl for allergies, things like that. We have here, bring extra clothing. We also suggest bringing an extra change of clothes if you are exposed to chemical irritants. And that way you can
One of the main things to do is just build relationships in order to do that. That's the easy, short answer, but I will add something, a little bit of a handout on that. The final thing when you're going out before the action is you want to ask yourself some questions and use a bit of a self-reflection technique. This is kind of in line with the grounding and the framing that Alice did with us earlier in terms of what the movement is now and getting really grounded and in your body and knowing what it is that you're about to do. You want to think, what are your intentions in joining this action? And this would be a good thing to add to your pearly discussion with your buddy. So what are your intentions? Are you going because you want to support a movement? Are you going because you think actions are super cool and you're going to feel really cool if you go? That may be why, and that's fine. And there's no judgment as to your reason, but it's really important to know what your intentions are so that you can act within those intentions when you're out there. And that's going to help keep you safe. Though it may be that if you are going just because you think actions are super cool and you want to look cool and get all the Instagram posts and Instagram likes, it may be a little harder to stay safe in certain ways because you might want to get a cool shot that turns out being dangerous. But still, if you know what that intention is going into it, you're going to be a lot more set than if you're not really sure why you show up. And what is your goal when you're going out? Do you want to stay with the action through all the way to the end? Do you want to go just to stand back and learn more? Do you want to hear from speakers and understand more about the movement and why that's happening? I know I saw in the intro some people saying they wanted to get a little more information about specific movements and the real core issues that are going on. That's awesome. That's a great goal. And then finally, what are the goals of the action? So that's really important. It's a lot different now in this uprising because there are actions kind of all the time, every day, and that can be a little confusing. And there's a lot of, well, what is this group going to do? What is this group going to do? And sometimes the goals of the action are not clear. And that can be for safety and security reasons that they don't necessarily tell everyone exactly what's going to happen. But at the same time, you want to have some level of knowing what is going to happen. If you think that you're going to go to a rally where you're just going to stand there and listen to some speakers and show your support and show how many people you are that support this cause, and then you get there and someone decides that, or the organizers had planned the whole time, that it's actually the whole intention is to burn down the building you're standing in front of. That may have been their decision. You might not have known that goal, but then you get to decide in that moment, what was my goal for the action? You've already asked yourself, what's my intention of joining? What is my goal in being here? And then when the goals of the action become clear, you can decide, is this somewhere I do or don't want to be? And I think that's one of the main things to really take away in terms of thinking about your health and safety, is that even if you fully support Black Lives Matter, for example, since that's a big movement we're in this moment, if you fully support it in every way, but you're at an action that feels unsafe to you, you are welcome to leave. You have permission to leave. You do not need to stay there. It doesn't make you less of a supporter of the movement. I've definitely talked to people who have stayed at actions longer than they felt comfortable and then had to process some of the trauma around the things that happen. And sometimes things will happen very suddenly that you don't know about, and that can be kind of scary too. But then you get to decide if you want to leave. So if you do a lot of this centering and thinking before the action and a lot of this prep before the action, you're going to be already in a much better place to show up and be there in the safest way possible. So now Alice is going to talk about some infrastructure. We're going to switch into at the action sort of thing. And Alice will talk about infrastructure.
Okay. So we've now arrived, and there's a bunch of different groups of people that are present at any rally, action, protest. So we've mentioned the National Lawyers Guild. These are folks wearing green hats. They are often lawyers, trained legal observers, paralegals. It was pointed out that the Seattle number is 206, okay, try me. And that's going to change throughout different regions. So that's one of the groups that's going to be present. Another group is street medics. Folks organized as collectives. Some people are individuals working together. So you're going to see people identified with typically a red cross. More and more people are kind of writing their qualifications or their level of training on that cross. So you know, okay, this is a first aid person. This is someone who has wilderness first aid or first responder training, which is a more substantial training, significantly more so. But this is someone with EMT training, or this is an RN. Oftentimes there is going to be a first aid station, or perhaps a truck that is the medic truck. So that takes different formats. There are going to be organizers present. We want to remember that every movement takes a diversity of tactics. And so you may or may not completely agree, but it is not our job to police the organizers. I want, especially for people like myself who are white, to take that really seriously. And yeah, as Kara mentioned, if you're not in agreement, you don't have to stay. So something to remember. Other folks that are going to be present, the Bike Brigade. I know that's happening in Seattle. I'm not sure if that's happening in other parts of the country. These folks are closing intersections, escorting marches, putting up perimeters around marches or around rallies, and are organizing independently or collectively as bike brigades. And then there's also going to be police present. We know that there may be police with different leaders, different levels. Are they national? Are they city? There may be folks who are in charge of being a police liaison. We suggest that you don't talk to the cops. If you are in the role of police liaison, that is a different deal. However, if you have not planned to be that with the organizers, you probably are going to best serve the interests of the march by not talking to the cops. This is always context dependent. That is our experience and our current recommendation. When you arrive at a location, it's going to be really helpful to look around and see what your resources are. This work can also begin before you show up. And I think that's really especially important in this time, because a lot of businesses are closed, because a lot of businesses won't let you use the bathroom. So thinking about what your resources are. So I love to use libraries. That is not currently an option. I think bathrooms are going to be one of the most important things to check out, both for yourself and for those around you. We're going to talk about hydration. To stay present, you have to keep yourself healthy and functioning. And so being able to find a place to pee, especially, is really important. Something that I have learned from Kara in the last 2 months is using construction sites as pee locations. We use them as like kind of a way for shelter and cover. We're also being conscientious about where we're peeing. So trying not to affect the workers with our urine. But that's my new favorite pro bathroom tip. Checking out where hospitals are or care facilities. Having that information in mind is going to be really important, especially if you've traveled to a place that you don't normally spend time. And then knowing friendly businesses, knowing who can provide you with a little bit of support. I also think you should have an idea about transportation options. You may have arrived in one way, but you may need to leave another way, or you need to leave somewhere like that the march ended up that was not where you started, and so you are no longer with your car. So knowing about what buses are running, what the current schedule is, knowing if you have Lyft or Uber on your phone, and if you're willing to use those services in this time. Knowing if you have some friends who you could call. Maybe there's someone who doesn't want to be out in the street, but they're up for a masked windows down ride. So really thinking about that before you arrive and then as you arrive, so that you're taking a look around. What are my resources? Where can I go if I need a little bit more support? Our big goal as street medics is prevention. A good day for us is when we don't have to do much of anything. Ideally, we're there observing. We have Band-Aids to hand out or hand sanitizer. So we are practicing all of these things ourselves to maintain our own health and safety, and we encourage all participants too. So thanks for joining us to learn a little bit more, or maybe just to kind of see some other people doing the work because you're already doing it. Okay, Kara's going to take us into considering the weather and environmental concerns.
Yeah, and first I just want to say shout out to all y'all in the chat. We got some cool, I really appreciate how much knowledge we all have together. And it's really cool to see that, hearing about their street riders in New York, other roles to consider. You're right. I do a whole direct action 101 training that goes really deep into roles. And it's so fun to think about all of those. I wish we had like 10 hours together. Yeah. And the Shiwi as a peeing device is also something I have friends that use, and they love it. So with that, we will talk about weather and the environment. Really big, important thing, since we're already talking about peeing, hydration. Hydration, 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 hydration. That's the last time I'll say it. It is so important. And I know, especially because things are closed because of COVID right now, it can be a lot harder to want to drink water, but it is so important to your body to have water. Literally, it is how your body works. So you really need to hydrate. Somebody mentioned diapers in the chat as well. Yeah, I see some of my direct action friends on here as well, and some of us have experience with diapers. That is a real thing you can do too. So keep that in mind. If that's what you have to do in order to stay hydrated, do it. No shame in that. Just make it happen. It's really important to know your own body and your own needs, because what works for somebody might not work for somebody else. And so knowing your body, what you might need in a long day of being out in the streets is really important. And as Alice mentioned, a lot of times actions are much longer than they're anticipated. So keep anticipating even longer than that. I like to usually leave with enough stuff that I will be safe and secure for at least 24 hours. Even if I'm just going to something that I think is only going to be a couple hours long, because I've definitely gone to things that ended up being much longer than they seemed like they would be. So we are going to talk about some of the weather and environment things, but in terms of also like preparatory stuff, food is really important. So I'm just briefly going to mention, we talked about peeing. I'm going to talk about pooping. Don't starve yourself or don't eat food because you don't want to have to poop when you're out in the streets. You need food to have energy to move. And when bodies eat food, they have to poop. So keep that in mind. Maybe don't eat a giant burrito platter if that's something that could maybe agitate your stomach to a different type of way, but definitely eat food. Thank you. It's really important because actually I want to tell a story about the other day on Juneteenth. I was medicing a march before it started, hadn't even started, and we were just all standing around. I was trying to find my medic buddy, and all of a sudden I hear medic, medic, and so I go over there. Somebody had passed out. This person was just overheated. They ate breakfast in the morning. It was about 2:30 in the afternoon when this happened. And so I asked the questions that medics ask. That's a whole separate training. And I can send you some follow-up info on ways that we're going to try to get some deeper training out there for people. But I asked, when was the last time you ate? And they said, oh, I had breakfast this morning. And I said, how much water have you drank? They're like, oh, part of this water bottle. And that was it. And that, and being in a crowd with a mask on in the heat. Juneteenth was one of the first really hot and sunny days that we had since the uprising really began. And that's just what happens. You can pass out. So think about that when you're thinking about, the night before an action. You really want to eat well and drink water. I know athletes talk about carbo loading or whatever it is that they do before their big athlete game the next day. So think about whatever works best for you. What are nourishing foods that you like? What are things that you really, really want to eat that'll make you feel good? Eat those things. So I'm going to show some slides real quick about something really important. Right now, because it is summer, we are in the potential for heat-related illnesses. However, in Seattle, we actually spend most of our time in things related to cold-related illnesses. We're more at risk for hypothermia. And I know there's folks here from Portland, maybe New York, lots of places. I didn't see all the places, but so I am going to talk mostly about heat right now, but I will send in the follow-up stuff about watching out for hypothermia. And the thing to remember about any weather-related illness, this is a very important sentence, exposure is cumulative. So if you have been going out every day this week here in what is called Seattle, it has been extremely hot. So each day you're getting less and less, your body is less and less prepared to handle what's happening because that exposure is cumulative. So you want to make sure that you are really taking care of yourself. And if you are in a situation that's more longer and drawn out, that you are drinking more water, eating more nourishing foods. Heat, oh, wrong one. Don't look at that. That's true, though. We'll get back to that. Heat-related illness can be really serious. And it starts off as, people can start to get really sweaty and feel really weak and very thirsty. It can lead to confusion and dizziness. You could get a headache. You could have some muscle cramps. This is leading into heat exhaustion, and this is very dangerous. You want to take action immediately. So you want to move this person to a cooler and shaded location. You want to get them out of the sun. If they're in direct sunlight, that has to change. Take off clothing. If somebody's wearing socks and shoes, because you do want to wear closed-toed shoes to a protest, you never know what could happen. But if somebody is starting to experience the effects of heat, maybe sit them down and have them take their socks and shoes off, just so they get more airflow throughout their skin. You can apply a cool towel to their head. A lot at protests lately, we've seen so many people bringing water bottles and things like that. So, especially if it's a water bottle that was in ice, you can just put that on your head. You'll want to drink water, start drinking water. You can also have a sports drink, something like a Gatorade or Powerade. Those can be good. They do have a fair amount of sugar in them, though, so consider that if that's something that you need to consider. And if you really aren't starting to feel better, you need to get some medical attention. It doesn't, at heat exhaustion level, it's not at the point where you need to go to the hospital immediately. But you do want to make sure that you're getting some medical attention if you are not getting better, because this can quickly go into heat stroke, which can be deadly. And heat stroke is when you'll have a change in your consciousness. Like if somebody starts kind of mumbling and they're not really sure what's going on, or they get really combative sometimes, if somebody really wants to fight you all of a sudden, if you're trying to say, hey, let's go sit down and have a moment, and they want to fight you and they have all these signs of heat exhaustion, that could be that change in consciousness, could mean their brain is not getting the right amount of oxygen and care that it needs. So it's really important to watch out for, especially in this time. And like I said, I'll send some follow-up stuff about hypothermia, because that is also dangerous, and it doesn't actually have to be super cold in order for you to become hypothermic. So that's some important stuff to watch out for there. Oh, I was going to stop sharing. Oh, good. It stopped itself. Great. Yes. Oh, great. Someone has a skill dealing with their own proneness to fainting. That's super helpful, because you will kind of know when somebody wakes up from fainting, they're going to be a little confused and out of it and might be like, what's happening? It's really great if you can be a calm presence there and say, it's okay. This is what happened. Yeah, and it can be cumulative. It can take you a long time to recover from it. So you really don't want to get there. We're going to go back to prevention, prevention, prevention. So another thing I want to talk about, that's kind of just some weather and environment stuff to think about. Another thing to think about that's kind of the action thing is, and it's specific to this moment, and we want to talk about it in terms of preparation and thinking about what you're doing in the streets. You want to think about the idea of white bodies to the front. So we've been hearing a lot for calls at certain events. They'll say, white bodies to the front, everyone come to the front. If there's fighting or some kind of like drama that's happening. I know Alice and I were at a rally and march the other day. I don't actually know what day that was, but it was the other day. And there were some, I'm going to say Christians in quotation marks, because they were not being very Christ-like. They were just disruptive and like ranting about God, and trying to cause problems. And so the organizers called for white bodies to form a line to protect the Black people who had organized the event and were speaking. And so that's a really important thing to think about in advance. It puts you at a greater risk potentially for police violence or the violence of these fake Christians, though they weren't even being violent. They were just being disruptive and obnoxious. But it does put that risk there. But I think it's really important. I will speak for myself as a white person, to think about the ways that I have had the privilege to escape a lot of harm simply because of my skin color. And so if there is a way that I can sort of put myself in a barrier, and prevent that, I will do it. And in fact, I am facing charges from the Seattle Police Department because I chose to put my body in between the police, who were going to start slamming Indigenous people with their bicycles. And I wasn't going to let that happen, especially because they were in prayer in a circle and their backs were to the police. And so in that moment, at that action, I decided, I saw them, the police do this thing where they start to get ready, they line up, they hold their bikes, and they literally slam their bikes into people. I know they've been using a lot of chemical weapons lately, but pre this moment, we've seen a lot of bike slamming. So that is something that I decided I was not going to let happen. And it did result in my arrest. And I, a year later, was charged. So it's a possibility to think about. And so I want you, if you are a white person or a non-Black person who would feel called to show up if Black organizers ask you to do that, to think about that now in advance so that you know what you would do in that moment, because it can be a lot to try to think about in the moment of like, should I do that? Do I want to do that? And so, you know, it's really just, yeah, it's part of risk assessment and reframing that. Thank you for the folks who said that in the chat, and just like reconceptualizing all that. Yeah, and you don't have to be down to get bike slammed. In fact, no one should be getting bike slammed. The bike should not be a weapon, but unfortunately they are. So that's some stuff to think about. We are, I think, at the next section. I think, yeah. Cool. All right, so the next section, I just had to check the time real quick. We are at 8:12. So we are going to 9, and to respect everyone's information, time. I can't read and talk at the same time. Respect everyone's time. We are set to still end at 9. Yeah. All right, so kind of in the realm of this, like thinking about your risks and thinking about how you're gonna be showing up in spaces, there's a really big job that street medics have that people may not think of. And that job is spreading calm. It is a street medic's job to spread calm. And one of our favorite things as street medics would be if you would help us with that job. When people are out at a thing, it can get really chaotic, really stressful, and people start freaking out and they're moving around, and suddenly they're stressed and they're just like yelling and throwing things, and stuff is happening. And especially if the police are doing chemical weapons things and throwing flashbangs, you're really stressed out. How many of you are more stressed out after me just saying that like that? I know I am. I feel stressed. Yes. I hear you. I'm sorry. We're going to go back to calm time. So spreading calm is really important. And this can be done in a lot of ways. There's a peacekeeper and de-escalation training coming up. Hopefully you all heard about that one as well. And that can definitely, like de-escalation training can help you with some of these calming skills. But even if you don't take one of those trainings, one of the biggest things I think that I've seen a lot, I think the most common phrase I've said in the most recent months is walk, don't run. So especially when flashbangs, tear gas canisters, things are coming up and going, things are happening, you may want to run away from that because it's scary. But if you run and you knock somebody over, or if you run and you fall down and then trip somebody else, you're creating all these other patients. We have a saying in street medic world, don't create a second patient. So don't create a second patient. You want to make sure that you are trying to stay as calm as possible. It's really hard when things are exploding around you. It is not easy to calm yourself unless you have thought about some of that preparation and centering yourself and knowing your intentions and having a buddy with you that you're like, okay, my buddy is like, good, we're good here. That can really help you. So spreading calm is super important, because now I'm going to show the slide that I accidentally showed earlier. Oh gosh. Not this one. This one. The number one weapon of the police is fear. They want you to be afraid. They want you to be so afraid that you stay home and you forget about all the police brutality that's happening, because it's scary and it's awful. But you know what? We are so much stronger than them. And we are so much stronger than that fear. And so do your best in the moment of things happening all over to really stay calm and really center yourself and know why you're here and what you're doing. And know that you are surrounded by people who love and support you, because we love and support each other out in the streets. That's what we do. So please spread calm. And if you can say walk, don't run. One of my favorite things was me and my street medic buddy one night in the pre-chop times when things started happening, we were saying walk, don't run so much that a bunch of other people around us started yelling walk, don't run. So that was really awesome, because it made, and then people really did. They're like, oh, and they started slowly walking away from all the chaos. So that's important. Another important piece of spreading calm is rumor control. So rumors are really big things. people love to spread rumors, and it's not always intentional and it's not always malicious, but it ends up having a malicious and sort of damaging vibe to the world. So we're going to talk about a way to spread information. That can also, spreading rumors can cause an increase in agitation. I've been hearing a lot lately about, oh, this person must be a cop. This person must be a Proud Boy. Like, this person has a gun. But people can't really say what they actually saw. So it's really important, instead of saying, oh, I heard this. I heard there's 50 cops around the corner. Who said that? One of the things we definitely saw a lot of in the pre-CHOP days is, so one thing, people have been listening to the police scanner during actions for years, but they have never been posting about it on Twitter so openly. So the police monitor Twitter and they hear that people are listening their scanner. So they, remember how I said the police can lie? Yeah, so they lie and they say, oh, this is happening. Oh, this is happening. So that then people will be like, oh, the police scanner said this is happening. And then people start freaking out and acting like that thing is going to happen, when in fact, maybe it was, but maybe it was a police lie. There's not 100% sure way to know, but that's why rumor control is so important. So this is a really helpful thing, and this will also go out in the follow-up email. To spread information, not panic, use the acronym SALUTE when you're talking about something. You want to talk about the size and strength. I saw a group of 5 or 6 armed agitators. That gives you a definite idea of what you're seeing. Their actions or their activity. They're harassing random people that are over here. Their location and direction. I saw them at the corner of 11th and Pike, headed west. That gets people to know, okay, this is the direction they're going. We can start to pay attention to this area. The U is for uniform or clothes. If they have any identifying thing on, you say, oh, I want to, look for the people in the red hats. The time and date of the observation. This can be really useful if you are messaging your friends in a place where there's a lot of people. Sometimes messages won't go through. So sometimes some of my street medic buddies that I've worked with will timestamp things. Like every time we send a message, we'll also include the time, just in case that message doesn't go through until later. They can know when it actually was meant to be gone through. And then finally, the E is for equipment and weapons. They have body armor and pepper spray, or they do have a long gun. You want to say what they have so people can be prepared for what's going to happen. So as this said, not a useful tweet if you say, I saw some Proud Boys. Okay, where, how many, what are they doing? So that's not as useful as saying, I saw 5 to 6 Proud Boys walking down the street at Pine and Broadway, heading west. They're wearing their traditional Proud Boy polo shirts with the yellow stripes. This was at 7:15 p.m. on Wednesday, July 29th. I don't see any weapons on them. The end. That's a useful set of information, more so than just saying it, and especially more so than just repeating something you heard and not knowing the source. I have been at more actions than I can count where people get really stressed out and everything turns really chaotic because of a supposed something somebody saw. I was at an occupation on the steps of the state capitol last fall, and somebody said, oh, there's 75 riot cops that just showed up around the corner. But we sent somebody around that corner and there wasn't anybody there. Now later, a bunch of riot cops did show up, and it was about 30 of them. But in that moment, whoever said that they saw 75 of them, that they were just making that up. So people started freaking out. It was a problem. You don't want that to happen. So make sure you're only sharing information that is observable. I saw, I heard. These are important things. So, yes, that is about that section of the rumor control and spreading calm. And now I'm going to talk about something that could get us into a rabbit hole, and we're not going to go into the rabbit holes, but this is going to be about the chemical weapons. So a lot of people are new to chemical weapons. More and more people are out in the streets and experiencing this than have ever experienced them before. And so I'm hearing and seeing on the internet so much misinformation, and it can be really hard to wade through that. So I'm just going to go over briefly some bits of information. One thing that's really important is that there are different formulas and different chemical weapons that are deployed, but when it comes to how to act in those situations and how to treat them, it doesn't necessarily matter what it was. So in the flashbangs, for example, that are the crowd control devices that go boom and they're really loud and flashy, those can be filled with pepper spray or tear gas or nothing. It doesn't matter. It's all the same. Treatment for new gases or clouds that cause vomiting, that's a question. It depends on the gas. And the police reformulate their weapons all the time. There are people who really study that. There's people that go around protests and pick up those things and do a lot of really great research on what it is and what the chemical formulation is. That is a bunch of science. That's one of those science rabbit holes that we could not get into today, or we will be here until midnight. And it's a cool thing to nerd out about, but we're just not going to do it here. So we are going to talk, though, briefly about chemical weapons in the way that is useful. I should just keep this set in a better way. Sorry, y'all, working on technology. Okay, so tear gas and pepper spray are both things that can cause really, really intense pain and burning and respiratory ailments, and they hurt your mucous membranes, like your eyes, nose, and mouth. Pepper spray is oil-based and is made with the derivative of capsaicin, which is the chemical that's in jalapenos and other peppers. Tear gas is actually not a gas, it's a fine powder, but it comes out in that gas cloud. I guess maybe that's why they called it tear gas, because it also like forces you, like tears just come out your eyes, you can't stop it. It's really awful. But those are just some different things that happen. The number one thing to remember about all chemical weapons is that for the most part, you will be fine afterwards. The pain will go away, the burning will go away. Unfortunately, though, some people have underlying conditions in which these weapons can even cause death. And so that's why it is so incredibly dangerous and ridiculous that the police use these on human beings. But that's another thing that we won't get into the philosophy of right now. It's just important to know that like you will be okay for the most part. If somebody has asthma, though, that's somebody that wants to really consider how close they want to be. If people are gearing up for chemical weapons, the police are like putting on their gas masks and everything, and you see that and you have really bad asthma, you may want to consider leaving. So these graphics, this is again something we're going to send you. You're going to want to stay calm, which is hard, but again, like if you're already doing this centering, you're going to have a better time with that. Try to move away from the source of the chemical weapons and considerations with asthma. If you do have asthma, you want to bring your inhaler, and if you're with somebody who has asthma and is experiencing those effects, you can ask them if you can get their inhaler for them. Like if they have an inhaler in their backpack, you could say, hey, is it all right with you if you can tell me what pocket it's in, I can reach in and get it for you, because they might be having a hard time and need it pretty soon. Great, so we're staying calm with the chemical weapons, thinking about asthma. We are also going to send you a video on how to do an eye flush. This is something that I really love to do in person as a demo during this training so that we can walk around and watch you and say like, oh yeah, that's working, or oh, maybe consider this. So we are going to send a couple videos. The main thing with the eye flush is the whole point is to flush the contaminant out of the eye. It is not to neutralize the chemical. There are all kinds of wild ideas out there about what people are doing when they're flushing eyes and what types of liquid to use. But if you remember one thing from this whole training, please remember, please remember to flush people's eyes with plain water. Water. It is the most effective and safe. It is definitely by far the safest. And it's accessible. I don't even want to mention the words of the other things people are putting in eyes. I know you've seen it. This is one of the rabbit holes. People want to talk about all sorts of reasons why they think other things might work, and they may. There are different cultures and different countries and different areas where people use different things. But what has been used forever throughout time in science labs and all kinds of places is water. And so the main thing is that you want water in a squirt top bottle so that you can actually squeeze it and do that flushing mechanism. So this whole thing explains how to do it just really quick. You want to ask consent. You want to make sure you are wearing gloves so you don't spread the irritant on things, and then you can take your gloves off afterwards. The first thing to ask somebody is if they, after you've asked for consent, so I guess the second thing is to ask if they have contact lenses. You really want to remove the contact lenses before you flush somebody's eyes. If you do not, it is possible that those lenses could be flushed into the back of the eye. And if there is something like an oil-based pepper spray trapped under that contact lens and it gets pushed to the back of the eye, think of how much that burns, and you need to go to an actual hospital to get that removed. So you really want to check. Hopefully somebody with contact lenses will say that they have contact lenses. You want to ask them. They might be blinking them out. Have them remove the contact lenses. You could rinse their hands first. They may have pepper spray on their hands, but the pepper spray or tear gas is already in their eye also. So it's just really important you get those contact lenses out. It's best if the person can kneel on the ground and has their hands either on their knees, or you can even ask them to kind of sit on their hands. This is so they don't keep rubbing their eyes and keep reintroducing the irritant into their eye. You want them to tilt the head to the side. Use your thumb to pull, and make sure you tell them this is what you're doing before you do it. You want to use your thumb to pull their eyelid open. It's kind of hard because their eye wants to close, but just, go for it. And then squirt the bottle. You want to flush it. A few good squirts from the inside corner to the outside corner. And then have them tilt their head to the other side and flush the other eye. Then maybe squirt some water in their mouth. They can swish it and spit that out. It's going to start reducing the pain, and that pain will go away a lot sooner if they've had this flushed. And then, so that is just like a brief how-to. The videos will kind of give you a better way to look at that. And yeah, I think that's about as far as we really want to get into chemical weapons and how to deal with them. One thing to keep in mind, and it was in the COVID type of thing, is that if you are wearing a mask, as you probably should be in this time, then if you've been pepper sprayed or tear gas, that mask is going to have that stuff on it. So you want to already have a second mask with you, or to find somebody, all the people that are around carrying different masks. So that's just something else to consider. And I'm going to leave this up, and Alice is going to talk about some post-action things.
Okay. So at this point, we've covered preparing to go to an action and being in an action. And now we're going to go into kind of how to safely close that out and get ready for the next time. So if you have been exposed to chemical weapons and you have your backup clothing, this is the time to find a safe place to change. and to bag your clothing so that you can avoid exposing yourself further, and then any other spaces or people. When you get home, ideally you're going to leave your shoes outside and let them spend some time out there. Anything that can't go through the washing machine, remove it and leave it off for a number of days. Wash your clothing at least once, maybe twice, with detergent in the washing machine. Take a cool shower or a lukewarm shower. Don't take a hot shower. We want to prevent your pores from opening up and absorbing more of the chemical weapons. It is physically rough on your body to process these. These are poisons. And so it's suggested that you avoid using things that are going to be taxing on your liver. One of those being alcohol, maybe thinking about the amount of acetaminophen you're using. So medications are going to be important there. If you're someone who uses plants as medicine, plants like Oregon grape, dandelion, milk thistle, all of those are going to help support your body, and specifically your liver. And then we suggest providing yourself with really caring for yourself, and then potentially having folks that are ready to provide a check-in and to process events with you, having folks that can, they can pick you up or help feed you. That's going to be really helpful. So upon leaving, making sure that you're going to be fed. I know that oftentimes you leave with high emotions and high levels of adrenaline, so it can be really uncomfortable to eat. But trying to find that calming space. I often end up doing a drive-through or getting takeout because I know that I'm no longer in a place where I can cook for myself. Something that you can think about beforehand is that food, if you're that prepared. Making sure to drink a lot of water. It's pointed out in the chat that water will help if you have been exposed to chemical weapons, and just getting your body back to its high functioning state so that you can stay healthy and continue to stay in the movement. We encourage you to rest as much as possible. I know for myself, ideally I have days in between being outside in the streets, so that I can rest, recover, and give other parts of my life time. I know that that is not always the possibility, and that some of us are making those choices not to do that at this time. We want to strongly emphasize emotional care. So that can take a lot of different forms. And I want to use this moment to use the chat again to just popcorn some of the ways that you provide care for yourself, and that you provide space for processing, and so self-care, but also care for others, and how you take care of that emotional impact. So if y'all want to throw into the chat some of those ways, we'll call them out, and yeah. Okay, get out of the city and into nature. So good. If you can pull that off, exercise, play with dogs, trees and moving water, journaling. Yeah, processing via writing is big for me. Turn off social media, stand-up comedy, yoga, appreciating people, poetry, tapping, watching a favorite movie, safe human contact if possible, for sure. I like that. Bringing your headphones to the protest and taking a break when it's too intense. Definitely a way. Earbuds in, dance it out. Gardening and harvesting herbs for tea. Yes. Absorb the history of protests and know what you did was effective. Yeah. Moment of stillness. Orgasms. gardening, deep breathing, ooh, taking care of houseplants. Yeah, dancing, movement, allies, walking, drawing, listening to music, pet the cat. Yeah, taking vitamins, more time, more cat time. Yeah. So keeping those things in mind, it's also, I mean, we know that it's really hard when you're feeling depleted to remember to do those things. I can like get stuck, like I get home and I'm like, I'm just going to get stuck in a scroll. So maybe like setting up an intention, like these are the two things I'm going to do when I get home. Turning off the phone, if that's an option for you. Epsom salt baths, yes, definitely. Throwing in like plants, herbs, rocks, letting the water totally drain out and letting what you need to let go with that water. Yeah. Okay. We are getting pretty close. Thank you all for sharing what you do and maybe like what you hope to do. Kara's going to talk a little bit about jail support, and then we're going to close with some questions, like time to ask questions to the group or to us, and then also just some closing questions for self-reflection. Okay.
Yeah, and I just want to address a couple questions I saw in the comments specific to that section, just because I know the chem weapons section can have so many questions about it. Somebody had asked about saline solution, and while like an already made sterile saline solution is fine, the volume of bottles that those come in is not enough for what you really need to do. So that's why like those bicycle water bottles with a sport top, like squirty top, that's going to be a lot better to do a proper flush and maybe flush a couple people's eyes. So just consider that when you're thinking about those. Like if you just have a couple of those saline bottles and you want to bring them just for your friend, that could be fine. But the volume that you need for a really good eye flush is going to be a little more than what that is. And then someone asked about if you get tear gas or pepper sprayed or something, if you need to leave the action that day, that's up to you. I have definitely done eye flushes on people who were pepper sprayed directly in the eye by the police, like close point blank range. And as soon as I flushed their eyes, they went right up back to the front line. That is your choice. That is definitely something you can decide to do or not do. And you can decide in the moment. If you're really hopped up on that adrenaline and you just want to keep getting pepper sprayed, that's up to you. I'm never going to tell you not to do that. Just think about how you might want to care for yourself better afterwards, and that it could potentially at some point do some more permanent damage if you're really up at the front like that. And so, yeah. So yes, and you do want separate bottles for eye flushes. Thank you. That is a very important point. So I'm just going to go briefly into a little bit about jail support. Me and one of my wonderful comrades who is on here, Ellen, actually do a whole entire training on jail and legal support that can take a couple hours. So I'm not going to go too deep into it, but I just want to make sure that people have a little bit of information about what happens if you do get arrested, especially if you weren't intending to get arrested. As we mentioned before, you want to make sure you have the National Lawyers Guild number written on you. And I do want to note that in the past, that number had to be activated for every single action. It is only recently with this uprising that they've been having it monitored constantly. And one day that may change again. So you do want to make sure that that number is activated. And this time it seems that it is always activated, but it may not be one day. So make sure you just know that in the back of your mind. You'll want to write that number on your arm in Sharpie, or not actually your arm. Somebody mentioned earlier, somewhere on your body where it's not visible. That's a really great point, because if the police see you walking down the street separate from the action and you have a number written on your arm in Sharpie, they're going to assume that you were at the protest, and then they can target you. Even the time I got arrested, the cop actually said to me, "Where's that number written on your arm? Every time we arrest you people at protests, you have these numbers written on you." I didn't have a number at the time because I wasn't trying to get arrested, so I didn't have it. But they know, like, police know what it means to have a number written on yourself in Sharpie, so you want to hide that. You're also going to want to write the number of somebody that you want to call, maybe like a friend or somebody else, because in King County, you actually get 3 phone calls. So you can call the National Lawyers Guild and let them know you're in there. And then you can call your friend, partner, housemate, boss, whoever, hopefully somebody that you have arranged with beforehand some information. So one of the things that we talk about in the jail support trainings, which, yes, we may work on getting another one as part of these Pledge of Resistance training series coming soon. There's not one right now planned at this time. But you'll want to talk to somebody in advance about what to do if you're arrested. One of the things that I'm going to include in the follow-up email is an action support form that has a lot of information. Like, you'll put your name, your date of birth. You'll put if you want to be bailed or bonded out, information on who to call in case of an emergency. If you have children, what to do with your children. If you have pets, what to do with your pets. If you have your car is parked in a 2-hour parking zone and you need someone to move it, all that type of information is important to think about beforehand. So the jail support form can be filled out and kept with a safe person so that you have somebody who knows that information on how to handle your things when you get arrested. And jail support can look very different in different times. I know when we have done jail support for specific direct actions, it's very well organized in advance. Everyone fills out the form. When people get arrested, we automatically start tracking them. We go down to the jail to welcome them when they get out. Things right now are very different because things are happening in a very different way than a specifically planned type of direct action. So right now there's a lot of people doing different types of jail support roles. There's a group here in Seattle that's been active for a really long time, and they're all volunteer. They're called Puget Sound Prisoner Support. And I know that they've been doing a lot of the tracking people in jail, because if somebody has your name, they can find you once you've actually been booked and figure out what charges you've been arrested for. So that's just something to keep in mind, that there are some people trying to do that right now. So if you're getting arrested and somebody says, "What's your name?" Tell them your name, if you want them to try to track you. Or if you've already set up jail support with your friends, then you'll know, even if somebody's not there watching it happen or somebody's not there taking your name down, you've already set it up with your friends, and you can call them once you actually get booked into jail, and let them know where you are and what happened. So yeah, and good point that someone mentioned in here, that whoever you call when you're in jail, the police can listen to your calls. So you want to make sure that when you're in jail, you're not naming other people who are at the action or sharing any information outside of, "This is what we're doing. I'm in jail. I got arrested. Hopefully I'll get out. Please, can you call my mom to pick up my kids," or whatever you need to say. Just keep it very simple and very basic. You do, in King County, you can look people up just by their name, their first and last name, on the jail support inmate lookup system. So that is something that if somebody just has your name, they can really find some information. And that's really about it for that. Oh, one thing to mention is you really want to do, if you haven't already, you should do a Know Your Rights training. There is a recorded one that is put put on by the Civil Liberties Defense Center out of Oregon, who's been defending protesters for years and they're really amazing lawyers. And that link is something I'm going to include in the follow-up email, this Know Your Rights training. I think it's about an hour and a half long, so it's very in-depth, but it's really important to know what your rights are as a person exercising your First Amendment rights. So you'll really want to try to do one of those Know Your Rights trainings, so you can know in advance things like when you get arrested, you don't want to talk. You want to say, I want to speak to a lawyer. I'm going to remain silent, and that's it. Don't say anything else. Yeah, so I think that's about as deep as we'll get into jail support. And then also remember, like, you're going to want the jail support form that I'm going to send out has a question at the end, like, what do you want when you get out of jail? So if there's something you really want, like you really want a Dick's cheeseburger, you can write that on that form. And if your friend has it and you call your friend and say, I've been arrested, then your friend can like come down, wait for you to get out of jail, and maybe they'll bring you that Dick's cheeseburger you really wanted. And that'd be great because being in jail sucks. Yeah, so I think that's about it for that. We're going to go into the closing.
Okay. So I see one question that is about becoming a street medic in the Seattle-Tacoma area, and there aren't currently any trainings offered. Our contact information, you can specifically reach out to us and let us know that you're interested. There's kind of an ongoing list of folks who are interested. I know that there are one option that I don't have specifics for right now. For healthcare providers, there's something called a bridge training. And so this is a shorter training. The street medic training is typically 20 hours long and held over the course of 3 days. Bridge trainings, I'm not sure what the length is, maybe 5 or 6 hours.
The trainings are about 8 hours.
8 hours.
And they're only for licensed medical professionals with certain licenses and higher. Like a CNA doesn't have the certain set of skills already that would be needed to take a bridge training. So it's kind of like you'll need to assess like what your license is, and we can help you figure that out.
And I've seen some online versions of that. I don't know of any 20-hour street medic trainings that are being offered. So all that to say, it's not happening right now. That I know of. Kara, do you have a different understanding?
I think it's important to note that it's not happening right now because we are in a pandemic that is back on the rise again, and a big part of a street medic training is 20 hours, and it usually happens over the course of the weekend, and it is a lot of hands-on skills, and so it is not really safe at this moment to do something like that. So there's a lot of work. There's a national collection of street medics working on all kinds of different ways to get people trained because people are really wanting this training right now. And so there are so many options for like ways it may or may not work. But yeah, at this time, there isn't anything. So it's really important to just kind of like skill yourself up in different ways. And then once there's a vaccine for this horrible virus thing, then we can just start training people again.
There is a question here about bringing IDs to protests.
Yes, I wanted to address that. I said I would, and then I forgot. Thank you. In the state of Washington, I know there's people from other places around here, so I'm sorry, I don't know your state's information, but in the state of Washington, you're only required to carry identification if you are driving a motor vehicle, purchasing alcohol, cigarettes, or marijuana, or purchasing a gun. So those are the reasons that you would have to have an ID. You do not need to have an ID just walking down the street as a person. So the question about to bring or not to bring the ID, a lot of times can fall into solidarity with the people you're with. If you are with undocumented folks or trans folks who haven't been able to change their IDs, or somebody who just lost their ID and couldn't afford it, because my God, Washington State, your IDs are expensive. I'm from Texas. They are not that expensive there. Then you might want to not have an ID also. All that happens is it takes a little teeny tiny bit longer for them to like verify your identity and make sure it's you if you get arrested. And that's the only reason you would have to show them an ID or give them that information. So you don't need to have the ID. You can bring it. It just makes it go faster, but that's up to you. And that's just for Washington State.
Thank you. Are there other questions right now?
Oh, let's see. Work repercussions for getting arrested. Your employer is probably not notified. It depends on your type of employment. There are some jobs that I think they do some kind of rolling background check. Typically, when you get arrested for something like this, you are most often going to be charged with misdemeanors, and there'll be things like failure to disperse, pedestrian interference. They're very small level things. And so in that way, it would not be something that your employer would find out about, but some things which someone has pointed out here that some licenses, like in healthcare, require a person to report their arrest. So that is something that, you get to decide and maybe check with your job, especially if your job is cool and you can say, look, I'm at this uprising thing right here. It might be good to check in on that. Let's see. Context specific. Person needs medical attention and ambulances not coming near the action. They're not going to come near the action. So the thing that happened at the CHOP was not a surprise to me, because the way that fire and police operate is that the EMS will not come near a situation that has not been deemed safe by the cops. And so if somebody needs medical attention, that they need an ambulance, there's a couple things that could be done. This is kind of a bit of a rabbit hole, but if they are movable, then you want to get them in a car and take them to the emergency room immediately. That is, once they're stabilized, if it's a bleed situation, you want to take a stop the bleed course. Like, this gets into a lot of things. But if you have the person stabilized and can get them into a car and to an ER, you want to do that immediately. Yeah. And I was charged with failure to disperse and pedestrian interference and obstruction. And, well, that's what I was arrested for. And then the only charges that stuck were obstruction and pedestrian interference. So they can arrest you for something and then charge you for other things or different things. It's very complicated. But those are some of the common, like, it was at a protest situation. So those are the charges. They're both gross misdemeanors, and you have up to 2 years in the state of Washington for them to mail you charges if you're released on personal recognizance. Again, this is like a lot of information, but yeah, misdemeanors that's most commonly what you'd be arrested for. What we've seen a lot recently, though, is that a lot of people are getting charged with assault. One thing, I know I already said there was only one thing I wanted you to remember, but there's a lot of things, and this is another one. If you touch a cop, they consider that assault. Like, if you just go, boop, I booped my camera, that was assault of a police officer. So consider that. If you're falling and you have the choice between falling on a cop or falling on something hard, I would say fall on the hard thing. Yeah, because they can make up anything, and then it has to go to court, and they're banking on you not being able to take it to court. So, yeah. I think the link to the recording, somebody asked if that'll be in the follow-up email. I think we can make that an option. That seems very doable. I think we're going to try to get the follow-up email out in the next few days. I have a lot, like, I feel like we've assembled a lot of the information, but then some of these other things that y'all have asked about, like, I'm going to add the thing about affinity groups. We can try to add the recording. Yeah, so just be on the lookout for that soon. Let's see. Other questions. I'm trying to read all these questions too.
I don't have a specific answer for supplies to donate in Portland. Pizza deliveries are always appreciated, or like food deliveries. Likely there are some organizations with public lists.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't have a good answer for the question about using your body as a shield to protect Black people or giving your protective gear. I think that's going to be like super context-based, super relationship-based. Maybe someone else has a better answer. I really don't have a good answer there.
I think it is kind of like relationship and context-based. I do want to say somebody pointed out it is 8:59, so we do want to respect your time and end at 9. Y'all have been super amazing. These are great questions, and I love that some of you are answering each other's questions. Again, that's really helpful. Yeah, and this has been awesome. Thanks for your patience in the tech world. It's been really fun to try to figure this all out.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. Thank you for being out there.